change in the attitudes of the ordinary Filipino.
That was a YouTube clip of former President Ferdinand Marcos discussing what he viewed to be the justifications for the new society he had established, and of course, the blessings of the regime he had established. Now, Bettina, let's just do a slight recap at this point, because we had to compress a lot of information. Yes. Have you seen there are basically two threads when you have a charter change effort going way back to the past?
Yeah, so technically, do you mean to tell us that there are only two justifications? In other words, there's one, the economic change, and the other one is more for political structure?
Yes, and always they keep coming back to those two main approaches. And what goes in to decide whether the public likes or dislikes those things is their attitude both towards whoever happens to be the president at the time. There are some presidents who will say, we have to do this because there's no one better than me. Or they will tell their supporters, of course you're talking to the public and to Congress, saying, hey, if we don't change this, we're all happy now here in government. Some guy might take over from us, so let's keep it to ourselves. That's on one side. The other thing is the public, of course, seeing whether they believe these are changes that are going to make life better for them. And so that's why at times you will see that even though the economic discussions sometimes get very heated, on the whole, the public supports it. Because how can you argue about doing things that will improve the economy? Political changes, however, often prove to be an uphill struggle for anyone proposing them. Now, in 1969, President Marcos finally achieved what had last been achieved in 1941, and that was re-election to the presidency. Marcos, however, was saddled by sagging unpopularity and the rise of something last seen when Marcos himself was a young man, a nascent youth movement. Now, except this time, the youth were far less polite and infinitely more radical than Marcos et al. Had been when they were young. Now, after fits and starts, and one wonders since the Constitutional Convention law was passed in 1967, whether with the encouragement based on foresight of Marcos, who was preparing for his second term, a constitutional convention was finally called with several main proposals to consider. The first was unitary versus federal in terms of the arrangement of the government. Second was presidential versus parliamentary. The third was unicameral versus bicameral. Though it seems economic issues were not at the forefront of people's minds, they were actually perhaps on the back of everyone's minds in terms of pushing forward the need for social justice at a time of grave unrest. Now, the results of the convention would, of course, have an impact on Marcos's own political future. In the end, the convention, after all these debates and scandals affecting them, was overtaken by events. The 1973 Constitution ended up passed in a manner similar to the way Congress passed the Parity Amendment, by means of removing the critics from the scene, and by other means as well. When Marcos managed to maneuver the defeat of the so-called Ban Marcos resolution, he then maneuvered a sweetener to ensure a healthy majority among convention delegates for approval. What he did was he dangled seats in the proposed new National Assembly for convention delegates on condition that only those who approved the draft charter, essentially written by Marcos himself, would get to sit in that assembly. Now, to cut a long story short, in 1978, after having amended the 1973 Constitution in 1976 to guarantee himself legislative powers even if a parliament convened, Marcos finally restored the legislature. It's interesting to consider what the process of constitutional amendments was like when the Batasan Pambansa was eventually established. In 1980, one of his lieutenants, Assemblyman Rodolfo Albano Jr. of Isabela Province, proposed a constitutional amendment. The amendment would turn the immunity from suit enjoyed by a president during his term of office into a permanent protection. That is, immunity from suit for life. Assemblyman Arturo Tolentino rose in Parliament to oppose the amendment. Parliament set up a committee composed of Justice Minister Ricardo Puno, Solicitor General Estelito Mendoza, Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile, and Minister Leonardo Perez, who was Marcos's advisor in political affairs, the Gabi Claudio of his day, and Assemblyman Emmanuel Pelaez, Juan Liwag, and Tolentino himself. Now, Tolentino convinced the committee to refuse to tackle the proposal as a hot potato, so it was sent to President Marcos and discussed in a meeting. Tolentino recounts that in the meeting, Marcos was furious. He asked, Where is it? Where is that provision? What will the military think of me if I will have only my own immunity as president and during my tenure only? He looked at the report and angrily repeated, "What will the military think of me when I will continue to be immune from suit as president, but those who are under me and who follow my orders in times of crisis and in an hour of need will not have any immunity?" Now, Marcos's table thumping met with silence. So he went further. "This is the time for us to determine who are with me and who are not with me. And for those who are not with me, the door is open. You can join people who are like you. You have no place here," he said. Now, of course, an assemblyman facing this incident of presidential wrath immediately chimed in, suggesting not only that the proposal for lifetime immunity for the president be presented to Parliament, but immunity should be lifetime as well for all other officials. Now, Tolentino recounts in his autobiography, quote, "In the face of presidential ire, nobody objected. I did not object," end quote. So the proposed amendment was debated in Parliament formally, and Tolentino devoted 6 pages of his memoirs to a transcript of the debate. But in the end, all he was able to do, he said, was water down the amendment through a typically lawyerly definition of terms. Bettina, can you give an example of this?
Yes, the extended immunity after tenure would not prevent a court from acquiring jurisdiction over the person of the ex-president who had become a private citizen, and as such, subject to judicial process. But the court would have no jurisdiction over the subject matter of the suit if it is a lawful official act, and so that would be the case, so that the case would be dismissed. The ex-president would not be immune from suit, but cannot be held liable because what he is charged is not an official act.
So in other words, no president would be exempt from being charged in court, but because every official act's presumed legal, and thus every official act is lawful, the courts would have to automatically dismiss any charges against any former president. Brilliant lawyering all around. And of course, with a massive majority in the Batasang Pambansa, it was approved. So the 1973 Constitution, according to the splendid Wikipedia digest of its provisions, introduced a parliamentary-style government on the start. Now, legislative power was vested in the National Assembly, whose members were elected for 6-year terms. The president was elected as a symbolic head of state from the members of the National Assembly for a 6-year term and could be re-elected to an unlimited number of terms. Now, upon election, the president ceased to be a member of the National Assembly. During his term, the president was not only allowed to be a member of a political party, was not allowed to be a member of a political party or to hold any other office. Now, executive power was exercised by the Prime Minister under the original setup of the 1973 Constitution, who was also elected from the members of the National Assembly. The Prime Minister was the head of government and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The 1973 Constitution also became the most amended constitution we ever had, and that was because of the nature of the Assembly itself. So it was first amended in 1976 by presidential decree to allow the incumbent president to hold the position of prime minister and president simultaneously and to exercise legislative powers as well. A minor amendment in 1980 changed the retiring age of judges from 65 to 70 years of age. Then amendments were done again in 1981, which established a semi-parliamentary or semi-presidential form of government with a president elected by direct vote of the people. That's why in 1981 there was a so-called New Republic. Additionally, executive power was transferred back to the president, who was now the chief executive once more, and the position of prime minister was reduced to a minor position. Additionally, the 1981 amendments created an executive committee. Now, the last amendments in 1984 abolished the executive committee and restored the position of vice president, which did not exist under the original unamended 1973 Constitution. Now, of course, Cory Aquino ended up scrapping the 1973 Constitution, introducing the Temporary Freedom Constitution, then appointing a constitutional commission whose handiwork was approved in a national plebiscite. But the ghosts of past amendments, however, live on institutionally. Number one, from the 1940 amendments, the bicameral composition of the Committee on Appointments, a nationally elected Senate, but weakened by the elimination of block voting, which was briefly restored under Marcos, then abandoned again, and the Commission on Elections all survive. From the 1980s amendments, the position of Vice President and the retirement age of 70 for justices all survives.